The 10 Plagues of Egypt, reconstructed with historical insight and artificial intelligence. Water drawn from the Nile becomes thick and dark, unfit to drink and unable to sustain life. Frogs rise from canals and fields, flooding homes, storage rooms, and sleeping mats. Gnats emerge from the dust of the land, clinging to skin, animals, and the air itself. Swarms of flies invade streets and houses, interrupting labor, meals, and rest. Livestock fall ill in the fields, collapsing where they once stood as symbols of wealth and stability. Boils break out on human skin and animal hide, painful, visible, impossible to ignore. Hail mixed with fire tears through crops and trees, destroying what remained of the growing season. Locusts arrive like a moving shadow, consuming what the hail had spared. Darkness settles over Egypt, dense and unmoving, swallowing time and direction. And finally, in the stillness of night, death moves through households, passing over some, marking others. These are the 10 Plagues of Egypt, remembered, recited, and carried across generations. Before they became symbols, before they became theology, they were lived as disruption to land, to labor, to belief, and to daily life. Welcome to Legacy of the Scriptures. If this kind of biblical history matters to you, you are invited to walk with us through this ancient story, step by step, plague by plague. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and remain with us as the world of the Exodus unfolds. At first, there is no cry in the streets. There is confusion. Men and women approach the Nile as they have done since childhood, lowering jars and bowls into the water without ceremony. This is not a sacred act for them. It is routine. The river has always answered the same way. But when the vessels are lifted, something is wrong. The water is darker than it should be, thicker. It clings to the clay instead of flowing cleanly away. Fish begin to surface, their bodies turning slowly in the current. The smell reaches the riverbanks before understanding does. What once sustained life now repels it. The Nile is still there, but it can no longer be trusted. In the ancient world, water was never just water. It was order. It was reliability. Egypt's economy, calendar, and sense of permanence were all bound to this river. When its waters failed, the disruption was immediate and deeply unsettling. Fields dependent on irrigation stood vulnerable. Markets faltered. Daily meals were threatened. The biblical account remembers this moment with striking simplicity. The water of the Nile was struck, and it became like blood. The fish died, and the Egyptians could not drink from the river. The text does not rush past the consequences. It lingers on necessity. People dig along the riverbanks, searching for drinkable water beneath the surface. Hands in soil. Desperation without spectacle. For Egypt, this was not yet a confrontation with death, but with instability. The foundation trembled. The river that symbolized divine favor no longer behaved as expected. For the Hebrews living within Egypt, the memory of the Nile carried another weight. It had once been a place of loss and fear. Now it became the first sign that the order sustaining their oppression was not unchangeable. The story begins not with fire or darkness, but with thirst, with a river that still flows, yet no longer gives life. They appear first near the water. Along the edges of canals and irrigation ditches, movement begins where there should be stillness. Frogs rise in numbers far beyond what the land has ever known. At first, it is only strange. Then it becomes unavoidable. They move from water to field, from field to road, and from road into the spaces where people live. Homes are not sealed places in the ancient world. Doors remain open to air and light. Floors are packed earth or stone. Storage jars line the walls. Into all of this, the frogs come. They settle into ovens, sleeping mats, and baskets meant for bread. What once belonged outside now fills the interior of daily life. The biblical memory is precise in its language. The frogs covered the land of Egypt. This is not terror by sudden violence, but by persistence. They cannot be chased away. They are everywhere, Their presence interrupts cooking, rest, and work. Sleep becomes difficult. Cleanliness becomes impossible. In Egyptian thought, frogs were associated with life and fertility, linked to the rhythms of the Nile's flooding. Their sudden multiplication would not have seemed immediately hostile, but abundance, when uncontrolled, becomes burden. A symbol of life turns into an agent of disorder. When relief finally comes, it arrives not as restoration, but as another problem. The frogs die where they lie. Heaps form in streets and courtyards. The smell of decay settles into the air, lingering long after the movement has stopped. What was overwhelming in life becomes unbearable in death. The land breathes again, but uneasily. Order has not returned. It has only shifted. And beneath the quiet, a question begins to take shape. If even life itself can overwhelm when unrestrained, what else might still be undone? There is no warning this time. No rising from the river. No movement from the fields. The change comes from the ground itself. Dust stirred by footsteps. Wind and labor begins to cling where it should fall away. What once coated skin briefly now remains. It bites. It irritates. It multiplies. Gnats fill the air, too small to escape notice, too numerous to ignore. They settle on faces, hands, and necks. They cling to animals already weakened by hunger and disruption. Eyes burn, skin breaks. Stillness becomes impossible. In the ancient world, purity was not an abstract idea. Clean skin mattered. Clean bodies mattered. For priests, for laborers, for households alike, the body had to be maintained. Dust was common. Insects were familiar. But this is different. This comes from the land itself, rising without pattern or limit. The biblical account recalls that the dust of the earth became gnats throughout all the land of Egypt. The language is deliberate. The ground, so often a symbol of stability, now produces discomfort and humiliation. There is no boundary. The insects reach palaces and stables alike. For Egypt's religious specialists, this moment carries particular weight. They are unable to respond, unable to replicate or reverse what has happened. In a world where ritual order mattered deeply, the loss of control over the smallest elements signaled something larger. Disorder has reached the body itself. At last, even they are forced to acknowledge what can no longer be denied. Faced with their own inability, they speak plainly. This is the finger of God. Unlike earlier plagues, there is no negotiation here, no request, no delay. The gnats remain until they have made their point, not through destruction, but through persistence. For the Hebrews observing this sequence, the pattern becomes clearer. Power is not being challenged through force alone, but through exposure. The illusion of control erodes, particle by particle. This plague does not roar. It whispers, constantly. It settles. And it reminds Egypt that even the dust beneath its feet is no longer obedient. This time, the invasion has direction. The air thickens not with dust, but with movement. Swarms gather and advance, pouring into streets and courtyards, pressing into doorways and windows. The sound comes first, a low, constant hum that settles into the background of every task. Then comes the interruption. Nothing can be prepared, stored, or eaten without disturbance. Flies are familiar in the ancient world. They follow heat, animals, and refuse. But this is not ordinary. The swarms arrive with density and intent, filling houses and public spaces alike. Work slows. Tempers fray. The simple act of sitting becomes an effort. The biblical memory marks a distinction here. The swarms affect the land of Egypt, while the region where the Hebrews live is spared. For the first time, separation becomes visible. What had been a shared experience of discomfort now reveals boundaries that were previously unseen. In practical terms, flies threaten more than patience. They contaminate food, spread illness, and render storage unsafe. In a society dependent on daily preparation and limited preservation, this kind of disruption is serious. Meals are delayed, markets falter, households struggle to maintain order. In Egyptian religious imagination, flies were often associated with decay and persistence. Their uncontrolled presence signaled a failure to maintain harmony. Temples, which required cleanliness and ritual precision, would have been especially affected. Sacred space is no longer protected from intrusion. Unlike earlier plagues, this one introduces a new tension: inequality of experience. Some suffer, others watch. The difference is impossible to ignore. The land has not been destroyed, but it has been divided. And in that division, a deeper question emerges. Not only about power, but about belonging. Who is protected, and why? And what does it mean when the boundaries of order no longer align with the boundaries of empire? The loss begins quietly, in the fields. Animals that once moved with routine purpose begin to falter. Oxen stumble while pulling plows. Donkeys refuse to rise. Cattle stand apart from the herd, breathing heavily, their strength visibly failing. There is no storm, no invasion, only sickness spreading through what Egypt depends on most. In the ancient economy, livestock are not secondary assets. They are labor, transport, food, and wealth bound together. A healthy herd means stability. A dying one threatens survival far beyond the pasture. When animals fall, farmers fall with them. The biblical account remembers a severe pestilence striking the livestock of Egypt: horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep. The language is broad and deliberate. This is not a localized misfortune. It reaches across regions and social classes, touching estates and small holdings alike. Unlike earlier plagues, this one cannot be escaped by retreating indoors. Fields stand exposed. Work halts. The animals that sustain agriculture and trade are suddenly unreliable, then gone. Carcasses remain where life once labored, marking the land with loss. Yet again, a distinction is noted. The livestock of the Hebrews are spared. For Egypt, this difference deepens unease. The disruption is no longer merely uncomfortable or humiliating, it is economically devastating. In Egyptian religious life, many animals carried symbolic meaning. Some were linked to fertility, strength, or divine favor. To watch them die en masse would have felt like more than misfortune. It would have felt like withdrawal. This plague strips away the illusion of resilience. Egypt has endured droughts and political shifts before, but this loss reaches into the mechanisms that allow recovery itself. The land still stands, the river still flows, but the means to rebuild begin to disappear. And with that realization, the cost of resistance grows heavier than before. This plague leaves marks that cannot be hidden. It begins on the skin, small at first, then spreading, swelling, breaking. Pain becomes visible, faces tighten, movements slow. What was once endured privately now appears in public, impossible to conceal beneath linen or posture. In the ancient world, the body is a sign. Health reflects order. Illness, especially visible illness, carries social and religious weight. When boils break out on people and animals alike, the disruption crosses a boundary that has not yet been crossed. The land has suffered. Livestock has fallen. Now the human body itself becomes the place of affliction. The biblical account remembers this moment with stark clarity. Sores broke out on man and beast throughout the land of Egypt. Even the ritual specialists are affected. They cannot stand before Moses, the text notes, because of the boils. Their bodies no longer permit them to function in their role. This matters deeply in a culture where ritual purity governs access to sacred space. A marked body is a restricted body. Temples fall quiet, not because belief has vanished, but because bodies can no longer perform. Work becomes difficult, sleep becomes painful, touch becomes cautious. The suffering is not abstract. It moves with every breath and every step. Unlike earlier plagues, this one offers no distance. There is no place to retreat, no boundary to cross for relief. the affliction is carried on the body itself. For those watching the sequence unfold, the pattern sharpens. Power is not being challenged through armies or weapons, but through vulnerability. Strength is undone by exposure. This plague does not destroy cities or fields. It humbles, and it forces Egypt to confront a truth it has long resisted. Control over the body, like control over the land, is never absolute. The sky no longer offers reassurance. Clouds gather with unusual weight, dimming the light earlier than expected. When the storm breaks, it does not fall gently. Hail strikes the ground with force, bruising the earth, shattering branches, injuring those caught outside. Fire moves within it, unsettling, uncontrolled, cutting through fields already weakened by loss. In the ancient world, weather was never neutral. Rain could bless or destroy, depending on its timing. This storm arrives at the worst possible moment. The biblical memory notes that flax and barley are struck, early crops essential for clothing and food. What survived earlier plagues now collapses in a single afternoon. Panic spreads unevenly. Some seek shelter, others remain exposed. For the first time, survival depends not only on position or power, but on response. Those who take the warning seriously live. Those who dismiss it do not. The land bears the marks of violence without warfare. Fields lie flattened, trees splintered. Recovery narrows. Egypt is not facing annihilation, but erosion. Its confidence in the natural order weakens. The sky itself no longer behaves as expected, and the space for resistance grows thinner with each blow. What remains standing does not remain untouched for long. The locusts arrive in waves, carried by wind, settling with devastating patience. They do not rush, they consume. Every leaf, every shoot, every remaining sign of green disappears beneath them. What the hail shattered, the locusts finish. In the ancient imagination, locusts were a living famine. They did not threaten the future, they erased it. Fields stripped bare meant no seed for the next season, no margin for recovery. The land itself appears exhausted. The biblical account describes them as beyond number, covering the surface of the land until it is darkened. The image is not dramatic, it is accurate. Movement replaces color. Sound replaces silence. Egypt now confronts not loss alone, but inevitability. There will be no harvest, no quick return to stability. Resistance has become costly beyond reason. The land stands still, eaten down to memory. Then, without warning, light withdraws. This is not night. It does not pass. Darkness settles like weight, unmoving, unresponsive. Lamps offer little help. Direction dissolves. Familiar spaces become uncertain. For 3 days, the land slows to stillness. People remain where they are. Work ceases. Speech thins. Time loses its structure. In a culture shaped by the sun's reliability, this darkness strikes deeper than fear. It disrupts rhythm. The god associated with light no longer governs the day. Order itself feels suspended. Yet beyond Egypt's reach, light remains. The distinction is quiet, but unmistakable. This plague offers no pain, no destruction, only absence. And in that absence, Egypt is left to reckon with its own limits. The final night arrives without spectacle. Homes are quiet. Meals are eaten in haste. Doors are marked. Breath is held. Then loss moves through the land. The firstborn fall. Children, heirs, the future embodied in flesh. Grief enters every level of society, from palace to prison. Power offers no protection now. Status collapses under sorrow. For the Hebrews, the night passes differently. They are prepared to leave. What Egypt experiences as devastation, they experience as departure. This plague does not linger, it concludes. The cost of refusal is no longer theoretical. It is personal, and it is final. The plagues of Egypt unfold not as chaos, but as progression. Each one reaches deeper into the structures that sustained ancient life. Water, land, body, time, And finally, the future itself. They dismantle the illusion that power alone guarantees order. Egypt is not overthrown in a moment. It is undone carefully, step by step. For Israel, these events would not be remembered as spectacle, but as foundation. They would be retold at tables, in families, across generations, not to glorify suffering, but to remember liberation. Seen historically, the plagues reflect a world built on fragile systems, where survival depended on forces beyond human control. Seen through faith, they reveal a God who acts within history, attentive to suffering, patient but resolute. To read this story well is not to rush through it. It is to recognize that what appears permanent may be temporary, and that freedom often begins with memory. If this kind of biblical history speaks to you, like this video, subscribe to the channel and share your reflection in the comments. Your engagement helps keep these ancient stories alive and thoughtfully explored.